In April 1889, at the edge of the Gallatin Range, south of Livingston, Montana, Eleanor Whitford recorded in her small notebook the moment she discovered a rock cave at nearly 1,800 feet elevation, about 1 mile off the Pine Creek Trail. She had been tracking a deer with her son Luke when she noticed a dark opening in the rock face. Unlike typical damp caves, this one was completely dry, with a flat floor and a southeast orientation, meaning it received morning sun and was sheltered from the northwest winds, the deadly cold gusts that had killed her husband the previous January when the roof of their old cabin on Paradise Valley Road collapsed. That death taught Eleanor one thing. In Montana, no one beats winter by luck alone. After returning home, she inspected the old cabin again. Wall gaps widened nearly half an inch, rotting, chinking, a fireplace that couldn't draw smoke properly, and high humidity rotting the wood from the inside. Every morning, the thermometer read 22 degrees Fahrenheit, even inside the bedroom, with thin ice coating the window panes, a clear sign that the coming winter would spare no one. 3 days later, Eleanor returned to the cave with a wooden measuring stick, hemp rope, and a box of matches. She measured its depth, tested airflow by lighting a strip of dry straw, and watching the smoke rise straight up before being gently pulled to the right, proving a natural vent existed high in the wall. She tapped the rock to detect hollow spots and assess structural stability. The temperature inside the cave was 911 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than outside, showing the stone held heat well, with no water seepage. Those numbers were enough for her to conclude this could become a natural insulated chamber. From there, Eleanor drew up a detailed, technical plan. Build a wooden front wall to create a stable air pocket. Use the 3 existing rock walls as passive insulation. Construct a sloped roof to reduce snow load based on Montana's average winter weight of 20-25 pounds per square foot. Utilize the natural smoke vent for a chimney, and calculate the minimum need for 68-foot logs, 2 tons of small stone for the chimney stack, and 40 days of labor before temperatures dropped below 15 degrees Fahrenheit by late October. Luke watched his mother write every line and for the first time felt his fear ease. He understood this was no longer the desperate impulse of a grieving widow, but a survival plan grounded in clear physical principles. Standing at the cave entrance late in the afternoon of April 22, Eleanor closed her notebook, looked straight into the darkness ahead, and spoke like a final report. We will build our home in this cave. This is the only chance we have to survive a Montana winter. In May 1889, Eleanor entered what the valley later called the Summer of Stubbornness. But to her, it was simply a race for survival against the coming Montana winter. The very first day she set foot in the cave on the eastern slope of the Gallatin Range, she noticed layers of rock dust that had probably accumulated for over 100 years. Eleanor shoveled it out layer by layer, testing the floor's stability. By tapping and listening to the echo, a steady, low tone meant solid bedrock with no voids, while a dull sound indicated weak spots that could collapse under heavy snow pressure. She marked the strong echo locations with charcoal, because every structure she built afterward would rely on that natural stability. Hauling the logs was the most grueling part. 70 to 90-pound lodgepole pine sections were tied with hemp rope and hooked to a crude pulley system anchored to an old pine outside the entrance. Eleanor had to lean back, using her full body weight to pull, advancing only a few inches at a time over the rough stone floor. She worked 10-12 hours a day, hands bleeding, shoulders bruised, but never stopped because she knew the old cabin in Paradise Valley wouldn't survive another snow load with its roof already sagging nearly 2 inches and wind gaps dropping nighttime temperatures to 20 degrees Fahrenheit inside the bedroom. In the evenings, after lighting a small fire for warmth, Eleanor opened her late husband's technical notebook, the only thing left after the storm, took him from her and Luke. She read his notes on snow load. He recorded that the area could accumulate 30-40 pounds of snow per square foot in the worst winters, on wall orientation to block northwest winds, on creating positive-negative pressure for better draft. Lines she had once barely noticed now became her guide, because a 5% miscalculation could cost lives. While she labored, rumors spread quickly through North Bend Valley. No one believed a woman could build her own home, let alone inside a rock cave. Gunnar McCrae, the valley's biggest braggart, rode up with 3 others to see for themselves. They stood at the entrance and roared with laughter. Widow building a bear den? Trying to die early? The mockery reached the saloon down south in the valley. Some even bet she would quit before September, when nighttime temperatures fell to 35–40 degrees Fahrenheit and the winds shifted. Others cruelly called it a living tomb. But Eleanor ignored every word. She did the only thing she could: continue. She built a wooden floor against the two naturally solid rock walls where she had confirmed strong echoes to ensure no pressure compromised stability. She secured each plank to the rock with hand-driven pegs, not for looks but to minimize heat loss. She packed the roof with compacted earth because soil has 4 times the thermal mass of wood, a figure she wrote on a scrap of paper and pinned to the wall. 4x heat retention. The streamstone chimney was not an artistic choice. She calculated that stone withstands heat well and rarely cracks under temperature swings. Critical when outside, it could drop below -35 degrees Fahrenheit, while the fire maintained 200–300 degrees Fahrenheit inside. The one thing that began to crack the valley's heavy skepticism was the arrival of Nora Briggs. She brought a still warm loaf of bread, stood beside Eleanor for a few minutes, and spoke softly enough for mother and son to hear. Keep going. When the real storm comes, they'll all be looking for this place. Those words lit a fire inside Eleanor, not to prove anything, but to live. While Eleanor worked like a survival machine, Luke grew up alongside the project. He learned to saw straight cuts, to tap wood and know whether it was hollow or solid, to haul logs nearly half his body weight. From a boy terrified of the cave's darkness, Luke became someone who could stand against the wind and pull the pulley rope like a man. But it wasn't always smooth. Once the pulley rope snapped and an 80-pound log crashed down less than a handspan from Luke's foot, a small error that kept Eleanor awake all night, recalculating load distribution. Another time, when they first lit the fire, smoke backdrafted into the cave because the pressure differential wasn't strong enough. The space filled with smoke in 15 seconds, forcing them to flee outside, coughing violently in the cold wind. But instead of giving up, Eleanor noted the cause, remeasured the outside wind, estimated 12–14 miles per hour that day, and adjusted the chimney angle a few degrees. It was all trial, error, adjustment, but always with one logic. If they made mistakes during the test season, they could fix them. If they made mistakes in winter, they would die. By late July, when daytime temperatures outside hovered around 60 degrees Fahrenheit but the cave stayed a steady 50–52 degrees Fahrenheit without any fire, Eleanor knew the structure was working correctly. The thick rock walls held heat through the night. The southeast orientation blocked northwest gusts, and the compacted earth roof slowed heat loss by at least 40% compared to traditional wooden roofs. Those numbers weren't just statistics, they were proof she was building the only thing standing between her son and death. When the cave cabin was completed by late August, it didn't look like a house in the conventional sense. It was plain, sturdy, unlovely, but it carried the undeniable shape of a physical conclusion. Stone holds heat better than wood, wind can't penetrate 3 solid walls, and every mocking word becomes meaningless when real winter arrives. To Eleanor, this wasn't just shelter, it was the final boundary between life and death. At the end of September 1889, as nighttime temperatures dropped below 35 degrees Fahrenheit and breath began turning to thin smoke, Eleanor and Luke moved fully into the cave cabin, not because they wanted to try out a new life, but because they knew waiting even one more week would make Montana's cold deadly enough to kill in sleep. The first night inside was the most important test. Eleanor burned just one small bundle of wood, about 1/3 the amount they used in the old cabin, to see how the new structure responded. What happened made her stand still. In less than 20 minutes, the surrounding rock walls began warming, storing heat like a natural battery, then radiating it back evenly until the whole space stabilized like an incubation chamber. Luke curled in his blanket, but he no longer shivered or breathed in quick, trembling gasps like the previous winter. The wind that once howled through the old cabin's wooden gaps now sounded distant, blocked by 3 thick layers of stone, as if mother and son had been placed in another dimension. By early October, an early season storm arrived ahead of the weather almanac, with little snow but strong gusts that shook some valley cabins, rattling windows as if they would burst outward. The cave cabin was different. Wind swirled only the air just outside the entrance but never penetrated inside. Both mother and son heard the wind change direction, but felt not a single cold draft. Seeing that, Eleanor knew the time had come for the full-scale testing she had planned since May. Every morning she placed 2 mercury thermometers, one outside the entrance, one inside the cabin, and recorded the temperature difference every hour. On the windiest days, when outside temperatures fell to 28-30 degrees Fahrenheit, the cave interior held steady at 45-48 degrees Fahrenheit without added fuel. When she lit the fire, temperature rose evenly by 10-12 degrees Fahrenheit and was then maintained by the surrounding rock mass. Comparing wood consumption made the result clear. Usage dropped about 60%, so low that Eleanor measured 3 times to be sure she hadn't miscalculated. Humidity inside remained below mold levels, and the rock walls showed no condensation, despite temperature differences of 20-25 degrees Fahrenheit between inside and outside. To Eleanor, this was no longer a feeling of safety, it was physical evidence. News of the unnaturally warm cave cabin spread faster than she expected. A few neighbors began sneaking up to see for themselves. The first stood at the entrance, half joking, half serious. "How does the wind not blow in? My cabin groaned all night like it was about to break." The second said nothing, just stared for a long time, before walking away in heavy silence, the silence of someone beginning to realize what they had mocked might be right. Gunner McCrae appeared one afternoon too, not knocking, not greeting, just standing far off looking at Eleanor's cave cabin, then back at his own wooden cabin down in the valley, where the walls were visibly bowed from a single night's wind. He clenched his jaw, tightened his lips, and left as though he had lost an argument he never dared start. While the adults of the valley wrestled between doubt and curiosity, Luke saw everything with more practical eyes. Every day he followed his mother to record temperatures, learned to observe how the cave floor temperature changed hour by hour, noted thermal stability whenever the temperature suddenly dropped below 30 degrees Fahrenheit. One evening, after checking the entrance and counting the remaining firewood, Luke whispered, "Mom, I think we're going to be safe this winter." Eleanor didn't rush to believe, because she knew Montana could turn from calm to deadly in half a day, but she couldn't deny the truth emerging as clearly as the warmth around her. Every indicator was better than expected. While winds from the Madison Range battered the valley night after night, the cave cabin maintained an almost unbelievable stability. Many nights, the temperature outside the entrance fell to 25 degrees Fahrenheit, yet inside it stayed around 50 degrees Fahrenheit even hours after the fire had gone out. Those numbers didn't just relieve Eleanor. They made her begin to believe that what she built wasn't just for survival. It might change how the entire valley viewed winter. By late October, Eleanor compiled all the data. Firewood used down more than 60%. Average temperature, 15-18 degrees Fahrenheit, higher than the old cabin. Near zero wind differential. And temperature variation inside the cave, only about 3 degrees Fahrenheit over 24 hours. At the bottom of the page she wrote, "Stone stores heat. Wind blocked. No loss." But in the very last line she wrote something more human than scientific. Sometimes an early success isn't for showing off, it's to make sure you're on the right path. Winter hadn't fully arrived, but Eleanor knew the first phase of testing was over, and the stone cave was standing firmly on their side. The move-in happened in early October, when golden leaves lay thick on the trail up the mountainside. Mother and son loaded 3 wooden carts. Clothes, tools, a little dried food, and the few keepsakes left from James. The most important item was his old hunting rifle, which Luke carried carefully the whole way and then placed on a stone shelf inside the cave like a ritual marking the family's transition to a new life. The cave interior greeted them with morning light streaming through the entrance in an unusually warm golden streak. The wind still shrieked through the pines outside, but stepping inside brought only the soft crackle of fire in the hearth, as though the 3 layers of stone had completely separated them from Montana's autumn cold and chaos. They began living to a new rhythm, lighting the stove, cooking in the iron pot over the fire, and most surprisingly, the smoke exited through the stone chimney smoothly, without any buildup. Luke was fascinated watching the flames and the soot-free stone ceiling, while Eleanor quietly felt satisfied that the ventilation system worked exactly as calculated. The first night sleeping there was the first time in months Luke didn't curl up against the cold. The boy wrapped himself in blankets, tears falling freely not from sadness but from the complete feeling of safety returning for the first time since his father's death. Eleanor sat beside the hearth, watching firelight reflect on the stone, and realized the cave's silence wasn't emptiness, it was peace, a natural remedy for everything they had endured. In that moment, she understood she wasn't escaping winter, she was opening a new beginning. In the days that followed, a few riders passed by, paused to look at the cave entrance. Their eyes mixed curiosity and disdain, as if trying to confirm just how warm the place really was. No one asked, no one stepped inside, but Eleanor knew they were studying every detail, trying to decide whether her choice was madness or reason. She ignored them all, because the cave had become home, and more than that, the only place in the valley giving mother and son a real chance to survive the approaching winter. October that year was unusually cold. Within a single week, the streams at the foot of the Gallatin Range froze 3 weeks earlier than normal. Strong west winds lashed the mountainside like knives, a kind of wind even the valley elders said they had never seen. Then a sudden small storm hit. 10-12 inches of snow fell in just a few hours, heavy enough to blow open the door of one wooden cabin in the valley, forcing the family inside to pile blankets against every crack. Eleanor's cave cabin didn't budge. Snow slid off the packed earth roof and wind was deflected to both sides by the rock walls, as though the place existed outside Montana's weather rules. For the first time, North Bend Valley residents realized something was unusual. One family passing by stepped inside and exclaimed, unable to hide their astonishment, "Good Lord, the cave still feels like autumn." The valley's skepticism eased a little, but didn't disappear. Gunnar McCrae stood at a distance looking toward the cave entrance and saw Eleanor's chimney smoke rise straight up, untouched by wind, unlike the smoke from his own cabin. He gritted his teeth and muttered through clenched lips, "Just luck. The real winter hasn't come yet." But inside the cave cabin, Luke began a new habit, recording daily temperatures with the mercury thermometer, noting humidity, wood consumption, and peak wind times. The numbers he wrote down revealed a simple but crucial truth. The cave was more stable than any wooden cabin. One evening, after checking the entrance and securing the latch, Luke turned to his mother in a voice deeper than his years. "If the big storm really comes, will we make it?" Eleanor paused, placed her hand on his shoulder, and squeezed gently, her eyes unwavering. "We will survive," she said, not just to comfort him, but because she believed in every number and every warm night that had already proven her choice right. Outside, the wind still howled, but inside the cave, the warmth held steady like a promise. In early November, a messenger from Helena rode nearly 50 miles up to North Bend Valley, face pale from cold and from the news he carried. He stood in the churchyard, voice hoarse from wind. "Bad news. An Arctic front is racing down from Canada. Forecast is a 5-day blizzard." Just 4 words, 5-day blizzard, were enough to shake the entire valley. Families rushed to cut extra wood, stuff straw into cabin cracks, cover windows with canvas. Elders trembled at memories of past storms. Children fell silent, clinging to their mothers. No one spoke it aloud, but everyone understood. If the forecast was right, North Bend Valley would face something many wooden cabins couldn't withstand. Meanwhile, Eleanor prepared in a completely different way. She didn't rely on hope, she relied on physics. First, she used scrap steel salvaged from an abandoned ranch to reinforce the cave door hinges, ensuring no point could be torn open by 70 miles per hour's gusts. Then she stacked extra firewood in the void between 2 rock layers, turning it into a natural thermal battery for longer heat retention. She dug a small pit right against the wall where natural temperature always stayed below 30 degrees Fahrenheit to bury salt-cured meat for long-term food storage. Finally, she checked the chimney system 3 times, tested wind direction, and readjusted the draft angle to guarantee smoke would exit smoothly even if the wind shifted. Everything was precise, no wasted motion. That afternoon, Nora Briggs walked up, leaning on her cane, wrapped in an old, heavy coat, and watched Eleanor reinforce the steel latches. She spoke slowly but firmly, like someone who already knew what would happen. "When the storm comes, they'll come looking for where you're standing." Eleanor looked up, gazed out at the pine forest trembling in the warning wind, and understood that those words weren't encouragement, they were a forecast more accurate than anything from Helena. On the first morning of the blizzard, The sky over North Bend Valley sank under a thick black layer of clouds like cooled ash, so dense that morning light couldn't break through. Wind began shrieking along the Gallatin Range, a long metallic groan like steel being bent. Luke checked the door again, then added the steel bar his mother had reinforced the week before. His hands shook slightly, but his movements were steady. By afternoon, the real storm slammed down. 70 miles per hour, gusts swept straight across the ground. Snow didn't fall, it flew sideways like razor blades. Within an hour, 2 cabins down in the valley had their doors blown open, snow pouring in, forcing the people inside to block every gap with whatever blankets they had. One family had to run to the neighbor's house through blinding white wind, small children screaming, adults shouting without hearing each other. By nightfall, North Bend Valley held only the sound of wind tearing at the mountain. But inside the cave cabin, not a single shake. Wind struck the rock wall and was split to both sides. No force penetrated the thick stone. The fire in the hearth burned steady, smoke exiting through the channel as though no storm existed outside. Eleanor sat near the entrance, listening to the howling wind echo in like a warning she had prepared for months earlier. In that moment, she knew more clearly than ever that mother and son stood in the only place in the valley capable of withstanding a storm like this. Not luck, not miracle, but the right place, the right structure, the right timing, and now that choice was keeping them alive. On the second day of the storm, tragedy arrived that North Bend Valley was completely unprepared for. Gunner's cabin, the man who had once loudly mocked Eleanor, had its roof torn off by wind in less than 2 hours. Smoke backdrafted from the hearth, filling the space like a black curtain, dropping his wife into unconsciousness from hypothermia in minutes. Snow lashed their faces like frozen fire, but Gunner still carried his wife, plunging into the blinding white, unable to see his own hand, guided only by the instinct to survive. In the night, amid the shrieking wind, Luke heard a sound almost impossible to distinguish. Faint, intermittent knocking, like a dying heartbeat. Eleanor opened the door, and Gunner collapsed across the threshold, body purple, lips bleeding, barely able to whisper, "Please, save my wife." She didn't hesitate for a second, even though he had mocked her the most. Mother and son wrapped blankets around Gunner's wife, rubbed her hands, warmed her slowly, checked her breathing as though holding onto the last thread of life. Word spread through the storm faster than the wind. Gunner's cabin collapsed, 2 people rescued in the stone cave. By the end of the day, 3 more cabins were severely damaged. 3 families risked their lives crawling through the whiteout, clinging to each other, arriving at the cave entrance with faces purple, eyelids frozen, bodies shaking as though about to break. Eleanor pulled each one inside, placed them around the fire, shared blankets, shared cups of hot water as though sharing the very warmth she had. By the end of the 3rd day, the cave that was built for 2 now sheltered nearly 10 lives. The fire never went out for a second. The stone gradually heated and radiated warmth back, keeping the entire space warm like a natural underground refuge. Eleanor looked at the people breathing steadily again, at the children slowly regaining color, and understood that at this moment every laugh, every doubt ever thrown at her had become meaningless. Only one truth remained. The stone cave was preserving lives that the wooden houses outside could not protect. On the 4th day, the storm still roared like a cornered beast, but desperate footsteps kept finding their way to Eleanor's cave entrance. A family arrived carrying an infant, the baby's face blue from cold. An elderly person nearly unconscious was supported by 2 grown children through the wind. A group of 3 had to tie themselves together with rope to avoid being swept away in the horizontal snow, whipping like steel cables. Eleanor was no longer just a survivor, she became the organizer of a mountain rescue center. She divided sleeping areas, the weakest near the hearth, the stronger farther out. Wet coats were hung by her, and Luke over the already warm rocks to dry. Food was divided evenly, no one receiving more or less. In the golden firelight, everyone quietly realized the truth. What they had once mocked a cabin inside a stone cave was now keeping the entire valley alive. Gunnar watched Luke give the last blanket to the newborn of the newest family. He turned his face away, unable to hide the tear that fell from shame and gratitude. On the 5th day, the wind finally began to weaken. The shrieking turned to the heavy sigh of a storm running out of strength. Inside the cave, Heat accumulated in the thick stone, created an oddly warm space like stepping into a world completely opposite the blizzard outside. During that final night, Eleanor sat by the entrance, listening to the steady breathing of nearly 20 sleeping people, feeling the gentle warmth on the stone face, and silently said to herself, "This cave didn't just keep mother and son alive. It was born to save them all." After the storm cleared, North Bend Valley looked like an open wound in the heart of Montana. Cabin roofs torn apart by wind, wooden walls leaning, pine trunks thicker than 2 feet snapped like straw. From the mountainside looking down, the valley appeared as a white map, dotted with dark patches of homes buried under deep snow. 2 people were found frozen to death right beside a cabin that had lost its ability to hold heat by the 3rd night of the storm. No one said it aloud, but everyone understood. Without the shelter of the stone cave, that number could have been 4 or 5 times higher. 3 days later, when wind dropped below 10 miles per hour and a temporary path to the church was cleared, 34 people from the valley gathered in the small wooden building on the hillside. The church was the only structure almost completely intact, built deep in a wind-sheltered rock recess. The air was heavy, as though the church floor itself wanted to sag under the weight of loss. Everyone knew this winter had only just begun. What they didn't know was whether the next winter would spare them or take more lives. No whispers, no coughs, only the creak of wood in the lingering cold. In that suffocating silence, Gunnar McCrae stood up. The man who had laughed at Eleanor the most now looked 10 years older after 5 days of storm. His voice trembled not from cold but from what he had to admit. "I was wrong." He bowed his head as though each word weighed on his shoulders. "If not for Eleanor, if not for that cave, my wife would be dead, and maybe I would be too." No one laughed at him. No one looked at him with mockery. The change was as clear as light through the frost-covered window. The entire valley was ready to listen to the woman they had once considered eccentric. Eleanor was invited to stand. She looked at each face, exhausted, scratched, grieving, yet still holding hope, then took a deep breath. She wasn't one for many words, but at that moment she understood every sentence she spoke could decide how the valley would live on. Her voice didn't shake, didn't rush, just beat steady like a surviving heart. The stone cave holds heat because the thick rock is stable. The tight wooden door reduces heat loss. The stone chimney doesn't crack under temperature swings. Southeast orientation avoids the region's strongest northwest gusts. And for safety, the cave must be deep, at least 20 feet dry, with no sign of water seepage. That's all. The people who once mocked her took notes on every line. Those who had called the cave cabin a living tomb now nodded continuously. One woman who lost her cabin in the storm whispered, "If only I had listened to her sooner." When the meeting reached decisions, 7 families stood up requesting to build cave cabins the following spring. No one objected. No one called them crazy. North Bend Valley had just learned an expensive lesson, and no one wanted to repeat it. Eleanor and Luke were officially assigned the role of the Valley's cave survey team, a position no one questioned because they were the only 2 who had lived in a structure undamaged by 70 miles per hour, winds and outside temperatures dropping below -40 degrees Fahrenheit. When spring arrived, the 7 families began the journey to find new shelters. Caves still damp from meltwater, Eleanor rejected them. Caves too shallow, rejected. Caves with signs of hibernating animals, rejected. The whole valley worked by one principle she set. If it isn't safe in the worst storm, it doesn't get built. From April to October, 7 cave cabins rose, each with its own features, some deep like tunnels, some with naturally curved vaults, some wide enough for 2 families, but all followed the foundation Eleanor distilled from the storm. Use stone as a wind barrier, use cave walls as a thermal stabilizer, minimize exposed wooden surfaces to outside air. In November, the 7 families moved in. The first night's temperature fell to -15 degrees Fahrenheit, with gusts of 50-60 miles per hour. Reports from each family were the same. Cave cabins held 45-55 degrees Fahrenheit with a small fire, and even 6 hours after the fire died, temperature dropped no more than 2-3 degrees Fahrenheit. News of this success reached Helena so quickly that 2 weeks later, a state engineer rode up to North Bend Valley to conduct an on-site survey. He measured heat loss with simple instruments, examined wood-stone structural interaction, compared firewood consumption between cave cabins and wooden ones. His conclusion, published in the Montana Winter Architecture Bulletin, drew attention across the region. The cave cabin structures at North Bend Valley outperformed traditional cabins by 60–80% in thermal efficiency, wind stability, and fuel consumption. The report spread to Helena, Livingston, then Bozeman. Just 2 winters later, neighboring valleys began seeking Eleanor to survey terrain, learn how to select caves, read wind direction, and utilize natural geology, things she learned not from books but from a winter that nearly took everything. The woman once ridiculed for daring to do what no one had done became the pioneer of Montana winter architecture, the one who saw what the whole community overlooked, and in doing so saved more lives than she ever imagined she could reach. 20 years after that storm, North Bend Valley had completely changed its fate. More than 30 cave cabins dotted the mountainside, winter chimney smoke rising from warm cave mouths like the breathing of the earth itself. Every snow season, this valley recorded the lowest casualty rate in all of Montana, while many neighboring valleys still struggled with broken roofs, cracked walls, and unrelenting cold. Luke, the boy who once trembled while sawing the first logs, had become the region's most skilled cave cabin builder, leading apprentices to survey every rock face and geological layer. Whenever anyone asked how he became so good, Luke only answered, "I learned in a winter where a mistake meant death." A reporter from Billings came to interview Eleanor, her hair now silver, her hands trembling but her eyes still bright. She led the reporter along the stone corridor of the first cabin, now a place for keepsakes. When asked why she thought to build a home in a cave, Eleanor just smiled. "I didn't have any grand vision. I was just tired of being cold. The cave was always there. It just needed someone willing to believe in it." In front of her old cave entrance, the region erected a simple but dignified wooden sign, hand-carved with words that every passerby stopped to read. Eleanor Whitford. She built warmth when the world mocked her. Late in the afternoon, wind from Frostbend Ridge began whistling through the pine tops again. Eleanor sat beside the hearth, her aged hands held close to the flames, feeling the warmth she had once traded her entire youth to find. Outside, the wind was still cold, still fierce as it had always been. But inside the cave, just like 20 years before, was another world. Warm, quiet, deep, and solid as the heart of the earth. She closed her eyes, listened to the breathing of the fire, of the heated stone, of the wind outside, and thought silently. Not everyone who is mocked is wrong. Sometimes what is ridiculed saves an entire valley. If this story touched you, please hit subscribe to join me on the next journeys. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.